Rhythmic understanding. So to get the kids to think in rhythms as large groups, as one measure groups, for me it was, rather than individual components that all had a different value and time to make up a sound. We were thinking in large groups. So for me it was getting some rhythm cards, one measure at a time in different time signatures and such, and kind of using those on as flashcards to the kids. There's lots of different techniques that you can use with those. I used them as flashcards, and the kids would sing back to me the rhythm that was on the cards. Or maybe I would put 3 or 4 flashcards up, and I would say, all right, I'm going to sing a rhythm. Which one do you see that I just sang back to you? Or I'm going to put 3 cards up, and I'm not going to tell you which order I'm going to do them in. I'm going to do 3, 1, 2. And then the kids have to tell me, all right, you did the third one, then the first one, then the second one. So they have to think quickly and look at the big group of what's going on, rather than she played 1 and then 2 and then 1 and then adding all that math stuff up. So for rhythm, it was spending a lot of time with the flashcards and holding them up for the kids in successively less amounts of time. You get 4 beats to look at it, and then you got to sing it back to me, or you get 2 beats. Eventually, you only get 1 beat, and then you got to sing it back to me. So the kids recognize when they see 2 quarters, 2 eighths, and another quarter, they know how that sounds because they only got a split second to see it.
Yeah.
And that's how real music works. That's what they need to do. So that was really time well spent. I'm really happy that I got that, because once we got to the book, rhythm was not really an issue. They conceptualized that really well. Nobody raised their hand and said, how long does this note last? No, it was a group of notes, and they knew how those group of notes already sounded.
And when you were doing that, and you said they were singing, were they singing on a pitch, or were they just saying ta on a, or some
well,
other?
Actually, with them, I had them sizzle the notes, and we conducted at the same times. So the kids would conduct in one, and they would kind of, all kids were comfortable doing that. None of the young boys had a problem with singing or anything. First days, they were comfortable sizzling. That's kind of a cool noise for them to make, and they were conducting at the same time. I could see the beat, they could see the beat, although they weren't trying to tap it out with their right foot or toes. And that worked really well. I really like that system.
So when you got to the books, then the rhythm stuff was, I've seen that before, and I know what that's like. And
right. Yeah. As long as we could, sizzle through the line, or just check our rhythms before we played. Rhythm wasn't an issue at all.
When you say students conducted, also, you mean conducted how?
I mean conducted in one. Just as any of us would conduct in one. They would just pretend like they were bouncing a basketball. Because that's much cooler for young kids to do than to learn to conduct. So they were just bouncing a basketball, and when their hand kind of clicks at the bottom, they should sizzle 1. If they see this picture, well, their hand clicks at the bottom, they should sizzle 2 beats. If they see this kind of picture, and then they just kind of put it all together. And then my students were able to sizzle and conduct any of their music throughout the book. Every time we got to a new piece, it was, let's sizzle this and conduct this. And every kid, without even thinking about it, their right hand came up and they just started bouncing that basketball. Just as any kid would tap their foot. There's no reason tap your foot. That doesn't your foot isn't any easier to work with than your hand is. Seeing your hand and bouncing that basketball. Kids really kind of grew, and they were able to do that without too much problem.
Yeah.
You started in this rote fashion with the patterns and groupings. Are those kids going to come back next year reading on their own?
I believe they will. I think they are recognizing the rhythms as large groups, as in measures, rather than just each individually. As we would approach a new piece of music, it would be that their reaction time was faster and faster throughout the year, of being able to sizzle it back to me, or to play it back to me. Whereas maybe even some of my older students, 7th and 8th graders that I have, would sight read a piece of music, and they would raise their hand and say, well, can you tell us how this goes? And my 6th graders didn't really seem to have a problem with it. They could always kind of figure out where things were, and especially if I asked them to conduct it and give me the beat, so they could see the beat. Their success rate was extremely high. Low level of mistakes when seeing new music. And I think that'll definitely retain through next year. Even if next year I do happen to say, by the way, this is a quarter note, this is a 16th note, which I really didn't get to that much this year. They're still going to understand it in the same way that they were first taught, and that is just by seeing rhythms and hearing sounds, in their head, and hearing how things work out. And I mean, I could definitely tell that that was evident in that, you know, at the end of the year, particularly when I was saying, let's prepare for the spring concert by anybody who wants to do those solos and duets and quartets, you know, learn something and come and play it for me. And they would learn pieces of music that I was never involved with. They would just come back with that stuff on their own. And the really good students would do that, you know, the top players in the section and, you know, some of the weaker players in the section. They would all be able to, you know, figure out rhythms on their own without my help.
Yeah. So is there a time, was there a time this year, or will there be a time next year when you teach them how to count in more typical ways, so they're just, they know how a lot of people count music?
I don't see a need for that, especially with, you know, the 7th grade year, just because my focus is going to be so much on other things, you know, blending and beauty of sound and in the balance pyramid and such, that I don't see myself ever saying, all right, kids, you know, let's go 1 Iana, 2 Iana today. I don't see that being necessary. If it ever becomes necessary, I would, you know, hesitate to do that. With some of my percussionists who are in 6th grade, who come to class and learn with me in this system, they have an extra after-school percussion class. They have a percussion instructor. And I told the instructor, you know, go ahead and teach them, you know, percussion counting systems, and you know, let them count on their own. And they do, and they took to it really quickly. And then they come back to my class, and they don't really count out loud, but then they can do it after school if they want to. And you know, it goes back and forth. And I don't think they're any stronger for counting with the system. And I don't think they're any weaker for counting with the system. It's just something else they can do.
Yeah.
I don't see a need to teach that to my students right now, but if I ever felt the need arise, you know, I wouldn't hesitate to do that.
But when your after-school percussion guy introduced that to those students, it was later in the year, right? So they had been not counting for a long time and reading music before he introduced that to them.
Right. You know, he wasn't really familiar exactly with what I was doing in the class.
Yeah.
So you know, he would say, you know, play the quarter note, and they would not necessarily know what he was talking about at first. But then, you know, he started out with, you know, just, you know, 1 and 2 and, you know, duple subdivisions, and they picked up on it really quickly.
Yeah. Great.
So picking up on the time thing, and the fact that you minimized your conducting all year. It was hardly there at concerts. It was even less there probably during your regular rehearsals. Was that a big change for you from the 2nd year to the 3rd year? And did you feel like you, at least initially, lost some control with the kids because you weren't showing them heavy, you know, time and beats and things like that?
Absolutely. I mean, my first couple years teaching, you know, it was a lot of people playing all the time together, and I wanted them to keep time themselves. Although I felt like everything kind of worked a lot better if I was kind of conducting things and keeping everybody together. Like that was, you know, my job. Realizing, you know, later on, perhaps my 3rd year teaching, that's really not my job. You know, that's their job. And as much as I may want to help, and as much as it may help, you know, it may help a lot if I kind of conduct things and cue people and give them a big gesture when I want them to play. That's really not going to help them as a musician, because I'm not always going to be there. And so to tell the kids that, and you know, do some exercises where, you know, they're bouncing their basketball and they're conducting, and then asking them to keep time and such. That was, you know, frustrating for me at first, because I kind of had to sit back and you know, kind of hold myself, and I was like, all right, you guys are going to do it wrong a bunch of times, but you know, you're going to get the idea how important it is that you're going to have to stay together by yourselves. So I didn't conduct at all for my kids this year, because there was no need to. I mean, there was no fancy, you know, cues that need to be made or entrances and long periods of rest. It was just timekeeping, and that, you know, I realized that they needed to keep their own time in order to become musicians. So yep, at first it was pretty messy, and the time was pretty poor in the classroom, and you know, to have an entire woodwind section, flutes, clarinets, and saxes playing "Wiggle It Like You Mean It" was really torture for me at the beginning, as far as timing, because every kid was wiggling it like they really meant it, but they were not wiggling it with all the rest of the kids. So to find something positive in that situation, and then move forward and keep that, you know, issue of time always kind of at the front of their minds, and can we get it better? Can we get a little bit better? Can you 2 people play together today? And you know, and keeping to develop that. You know, eventually it did start to develop, and it started to develop, you know, really maturely, to where now, you know, they really don't need me that much to keep time. and that's really rewarding, because that makes, my job a lot different now. And I can, just not conduct it all in a class period. I can start to listen to them and walk around and think about how they sound and give them feedback that's appropriate, and they don't need to look at me to, conduct the entire class.
Yeah.
When you think back to trying to shape their ability to maintain a steady pulse and to play, in agreement with each other, how did you shape that? I mean, when it was terribly messy at the beginning and you were trying to stay out of the way, I mean, obviously you can't stay totally out of the way. You've got to make some suggestions. You've got to tell them what to do. And what was that all about?
Right. For instance, going back to Wiggle It Like You Mean It, having an entire woodwind section play out pieces will be a train wreck. It was ridiculous. We couldn't put that together at first. In our book that we used, it was I think the fourth song that we played. So I did have to deal with that in some way. So I would have much smaller groups play at a time, and other people maybe just conduct and listen and try and keep up with those people and see if they were together and see if you were with them. And perhaps I would play and have just one person play with me and ask the class, were we together or were we separate? Was I behind or was I ahead? And can we just do it again? And then you and I will play again, and it'll be better. And then maybe two people play, and then maybe an entire section plays, and then maybe we'll go on and we'll do the same thing again tomorrow, but maybe with some flute players. And getting them to think that time is really important, and it's a really hard concept. They need to appreciate it and respect time for being something that's not easy to do. And once they do that, they can start kind of tuning into each other and tuning into themselves and trying to make sure that they're doing their job to keep the right time. Although it wasn't something that I just beat into them from the beginning. I did not ever insist that we play Wiggle It Like You Mean It as a class in October, all together, because that would have been, it would have been really, it would have been unrewarding for everybody in the room, for me and the kids. I would have had to beat it into them. I would have gotten frustrated. They would have gotten frustrated. That's not going to help. But teaching them the concept and taking something positive out of that and applying it to something else, it's kind of little bits at a time that I taught time to the kids. Yeah. Just you and me together, then you two, then get the whole section, and that kind of thing.
Well, I noticed in the concert, how many of the tunes, like a large group of students would be playing, and then like one group of students would continue after a bar, after a double bar, and then some other group would come in after a double bar, and everybody was coming in without any cueing from you or anything. They just were able to do that, and they were right on time. And so what was interesting to me about that is how that illustrated kids' sense of time even when they weren't playing. When they're waiting to come in, their sense of time was terrific. While another part of their group was playing, and now they know they're going to come in the next time after the double bar, and they were right on time because they had, you see why I'm cued in about that. The times that you had other people playing and everyone else was bouncing the basketball and keeping with them and really trying to, see how that all worked together with listening and pulsing beat and listening to the rhythm all at the same time.
Right, and as a musician, if I have a rest and other people are playing, I'm not brain dead, and my mind's on my lunch. I'm thinking of the tempo and the time, and I'm counting, and I'm ready to come in. And sometimes I think teachers forget to tell kids that that's what they need to be doing. They might say, just wait for 4 beats and then come in. Well, I make sure and tell my students, this is what you're thinking, and I articulate it to them. Let's count 1, 2, you're ready, and then play, so that I know what's going on in their head. They know what I expect to go on in their head. They know what to do in that situation.
Yeah.